Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, you're not just listening to history, you're stepping into the quiet edges of the past. A world where medieval people stared at blood-red skies and whispered omens, where Roman streets breathed danger after sunset, where messages crossed vast frontiers on horseback through silence and waiting, and where, at the heart of great empires, ordinary people found comfort in something as simple as warm street food at night. This isn't a story about kings, battles, or dates to remember. It's about how people lived with fear, distance, mystery, and noise, and how they slowly learned to rest anyway. These are the strange sights, quiet dangers, long waits, and gentle comforts that shaped everyday life across centuries, told softly, the way history once unfolded. So, before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, feel the noise of the modern world fade, and allow yourself to drift back through centuries of human experience, where history moves gently and rest comes one moment at a time. Imagine living in a world where the sky itself felt alive, not as a distant backdrop, but as something watching, something speaking in signs and colors. In the medieval world, the heavens were not silent. A crimson sunset was not merely beautiful, it was unsettling. A blood-red moon did not invite poetry, but prayer. People did not look up and wonder what caused such sights. They looked up and wondered what they meant. And meaning in those centuries was never neutral. It was a warning, a judgment, or a whisper from forces beyond human reach. To live in medieval times was to exist inside a landscape where the unexplained was not rare, but constant, woven quietly into the rhythm of everyday life. A farmer waking before dawn might glance at the horizon and feel a knot in his chest if the sky glowed strangely. A mother might hold her child closer if the wind carried an unfamiliar sound through the village at night. These were not moments of panic, but of awareness, because uncertainty was not an interruption to life, it was life itself. Illness, for example, arrived without reason and without mercy. A fever could take a strong man within days, and recovery felt less like healing and more like forgiveness. When sickness spread, it did not move through bodies alone, but through belief. People spoke in lowered voices, not wanting to attract attention from whatever unseen force might be passing through their homes. Remedies were chosen for their symbolism. Herbs were tied with thread, charms were hung by beds, and prayers were repeated softly in the dark, not because anyone was certain they worked, but because doing something felt safer than doing nothing. In this world, the human body itself could appear strange and frightening. Children were sometimes born different, with features that did not fit the familiar patterns of village life. These differences were rarely seen as accidents of nature. They were signs, messages, or reminders that the world was larger and more mysterious than anyone wished to admit. A child with an unusual appearance might be treated with reverence in one place and fear in another, but almost never with indifference. Indifference belonged to later centuries. Medieval people did not have the luxury of detachment. Everything carried weight, and every anomaly demanded interpretation. Even natural events that we now see as harmless carried deep emotional power. An eclipse could stop work entirely, freezing towns in collective stillness as people waited for the light to return. Strange noises in the night were not dismissed as animals or weather. They became stories by morning, shaped and reshaped as they passed from mouth to mouth.
These stories were not told to entertain, but to make sense of the fear that lingered after the telling was done. And yet, within all of this uncertainty, medieval life was not lived in constant terror. There was familiarity in the strange, a quiet acceptance that the world did not exist for human comfort. People learned to live beside mystery, not to solve it, but to accommodate it. The unexplained became part of the mental furniture of daily life, as ordinary as tools hanging on a wall or bread cooling on a table. What appears to us as ignorance was in truth a different relationship with reality. Medieval people were not less intelligent, they were simply closer to the unknown. They lived without the promise that everything could be explained, and so they learned patience with ambiguity. In the soft glow of firelight, listening to the wind press against wooden walls, they understood something modern minds often forget, that not knowing does not always demand an answer. Sometimes it only asks for endurance. And as the centuries passed, these quiet moments of uncertainty, these strange sights and whispered fears, layered themselves into the collective memory of Europe, shaping how people would later respond when cities grew louder, streets grew crowded, and fear slowly descended from the sky and found a new home among the people themselves.
In the medieval imagination, the world was never empty. Even the spaces between things felt occupied, filled with presence, intention, and memory. Roads were not just paths from one village to another. They were thresholds where the familiar faded and the unknown pressed closer. Travelers moved slowly, not only because the roads were rough, but because distance itself carried risk. Each mile away from home loosened the grip of routine and tightened the pull of uncertainty. Along these roads, stories traveled faster than people. A rumor of a strange birth, a malformed animal, or a village struck by sudden illness could arrive before dawn, carried by whispers that changed shape as they moved. By the time such stories reached a listener's ear, they were no longer reports, but warnings, layered with fear and meaning. To the medieval mind, coincidence was rare. When several strange events occurred close together, they were not separate incidents, but pieces of a larger pattern, one that demanded attention. Nature itself seemed to participate in this language of signs. A storm arriving out of season, a river changing its course, or crops failing without obvious cause were not viewed as random misfortunes. They were read as responses, as though the land itself were reacting to human behavior. People adjusted their actions accordingly, sometimes with humility, sometimes with desperation. Festivals were altered, rituals repeated, and old customs revived in the hope of restoring balance. This was not superstition, as mockery would later define it, but an attempt to negotiate with a world that felt responsive, sensitive, and easily disturbed. Within homes, the sense of strangeness took quieter forms. Objects were believed to remember. A broken tool carried the memory of the last hand that used it. A creaking beam in the night was not simply wood settling, but a reminder of age, of time passing through the house like a slow breath. Dreams were listened to carefully. A dream of fire or water might linger in the mind for days, shaping decisions and moods. Sleep itself was not an escape from reality, but another doorway into it. What appeared during rest was sometimes trusted more than what was seen in daylight, because dreams were thought to bypass deception and speak directly from deeper truths. Children learned these ways of seeing early. They grew up knowing which woods were avoided at dusk, which stones were not moved, and which words were spoken softly or not at all. Fear was not taught as panic, but as caution. It shaped behavior gently, like a hand on the shoulder, guiding rather than pushing. And so, strangeness did not shatter medieval life, it structured it. It created boundaries, rhythms, and expectations. People learned when to gather, when to stay indoors, and when to remain silent. Over time, these shared responses formed a quiet social order, one that did not rely on written laws alone, but on collective memory and unspoken agreement. Yet, as towns grew and populations thickened, this delicate balance began to shift. When more people lived closer together, the unknown no longer came only from distant skies or silent forests. It began to emerge from neighbors, from crowded markets, from streets where anonymity replaced familiarity. The signs were no longer read solely in clouds or omens, but in human behavior. A raised voice, a sudden movement, a group gathering too quickly could feel just as threatening as a red sky once had. The medieval world was slowly turning inward, moving from a fear of cosmic messages to a fear of human unpredictability. This transition did not happen all at once, nor was it noticed clearly by those living through it. It unfolded gradually, like dusk settling over a familiar landscape, changing its shape without erasing it. The old fears did not vanish, they simply made room for new ones. And in that narrowing space, between the mysteries of nature and the tensions of crowded life, medieval society prepared itself, unknowingly, for a different kind of darkness, one that would no longer fall from above, but rise quietly from the streets below.
As medieval towns expanded, strangeness did not disappear. It changed its shape. What once lived in forests and skies slowly took residence among people themselves. The unfamiliar no longer arrived only through omens or natural signs, but through behavior, through moments that felt slightly out of place yet difficult to explain. In crowded settlements, silence became rare, and with noise came uncertainty of a different kind. Voices overlapped, footsteps echoed, and the simple act of moving through a street required constant awareness. People began to notice patterns, not in stars or storms, but in faces, habits, and gatherings. A person who lingered too long at a corner, a group that whispered instead of speaking openly, or a sudden hush spreading through a crowd could feel unsettling without anyone knowing exactly why. These sensations were not dramatic but persistent, like a low pressure in the air. Medieval people learned to read their surroundings carefully, developing an instinct for tension long before danger revealed itself. This instinct was shaped by memory. Towns carried stories the way walls carried soot, layer upon layer of past moments clinging quietly to the present. A street where a dispute once erupted never fully returned to neutrality. Even years later, people walked it differently, quicker perhaps, or closer to the walls. The strange, in this sense, was not always visible, it was felt. A market that suddenly grew too quiet, or a tavern that emptied earlier than usual, did not need explanation. The body understood before the mind did. In such environments, rumors served a new purpose. They were no longer about distant marvels or divine signs, but about human intentions. Stories circulated about individuals rather than events, about who could be trusted, who should be avoided, and which spaces felt safe after nightfall. These narratives were fluid, changing with each retelling, but their function remained constant: to help people navigate a world where proximity increased vulnerability. The medieval town was a place where anonymity and familiarity existed side by side, creating a tension that felt unfamiliar to earlier village life. You might recognize every face you passed, yet never truly know their thoughts. This uncertainty produced its own kind of strangeness, quieter than eclipses, but more intimate. Even everyday routines carried subtle shifts. People adjusted their schedules, choosing when to leave home or return based on impressions rather than logic. Some streets were avoided not because of anything that had happened recently, but because of how they felt. This was not fear in the dramatic sense, but caution woven into habit. Over time, these habits became invisible rules, guiding movement and interaction without being spoken aloud. The strange thus became embedded in the social fabric, no longer an interruption, but a background presence. Children growing up in these towns absorbed this awareness naturally. They learned where to play and where not to, which doors felt welcoming and which seemed closed even when open. These lessons were not taught through warnings, but through observation. Watching adults hesitate, lower their voices, or cross a street without comment conveyed more than any explanation could. The medieval world was training its inhabitants to sense rather than analyze, to respond rather than question. And yet, amid all this, life continued with a kind of steady normalcy. People still shared meals, attended festivals, and marked time through familiar rituals. The strange did not consume their days, it framed them. It reminded everyone that order was fragile, maintained not by certainty, but by shared understanding. This balance, however, was becoming harder to sustain. As populations grew denser and interactions more frequent, the line between unease and conflict grew thinner. What began as a feeling could quickly become an action, especially when many felt it at once. The medieval town was reaching a threshold, though its inhabitants could not yet name it. They sensed only that the world was changing, that the sources of fear were moving closer, becoming more human, more immediate. The sky still mattered, the forests still whispered, but increasingly attention turned inward toward the streets, the crowds, and the unpredictable behavior of those who walked among them. In this gradual shift, the medieval experience of strangeness prepared the ground for something new, something louder and less symbolic, a form of uncertainty that would soon no longer hide in omens or feelings, but announce itself openly, in motion, in voices raised, and in the charged spaces between people.
By the late medieval period, strangeness had become something people no longer pointed at directly. It no longer demanded stories to explain it, because it had settled into the background of daily life, quiet and familiar. What once startled now merely registered. What once inspired prayer now inspired caution. People did not wake each morning expecting certainty. They woke expecting variation. The unusual had taught them flexibility, a way of living that adjusted rather than resisted. In this world, survival depended less on understanding and more on awareness. To notice subtle changes in atmosphere, in tone, in movement, became as important as knowing when to plant crops or mend tools. Medieval life, shaped by centuries of unexplained sights and sensations, had trained its people to move carefully through uncertainty. They listened more than they spoke, observed more than they assumed. This was not wisdom gained through books, but through repetition. Strange skies, strange illnesses, strange behaviors had all delivered the same lesson, slowly and patiently. The world does not announce its intentions clearly. And so people learned to watch for signals wherever they appeared. Over time, this habit of attention began to shift its focus. As settlements grew into towns and towns pressed toward cities, the most immediate signals no longer came from nature. They came from proximity, from bodies moving too close together, from voices raised in confined spaces,
from glances held a moment too long. The medieval sense of strangeness, once expansive and cosmic, narrowed into something personal. The unknown now wore familiar faces. It stood beside you in the market, passed you on the road, shared your water and your air. This change did not erase old beliefs, it repurposed them. The same instinct that once read omens in the sky now read intentions in crowds. The same caution that once followed eclipses now followed rumors. Strangeness became social. And with that shift came a new tension. When fear is distant, it humbles. When fear is close, it provokes. Medieval people did not articulate this difference, but they felt it. The body responded before the mind could reason. Muscles tightened more often, attention sharpened. The sense of living among forces beyond control remained, but those forces were now human, unpredictable in ways that nature had never been. This was the quiet threshold between worlds, a moment where the medieval experience of mystery began to transform into an experience of threat. The strange was no longer something to endure patiently, it was something that required navigation. Streets became as symbolically charged as skies once were. Corners held memory, pathways carried reputation, movement itself gained meaning. In this environment, stillness could feel as dangerous as motion. And yet, even here, medieval life did not collapse into chaos. Customs adapted. People formed unspoken rules, alliances, and understandings to restore balance. These adjustments were not dramatic reforms, but subtle recalibrations of daily behavior. Choosing where to walk, when to speak, and whom to trust became acts of quiet strategy. What had begun centuries earlier as a response to an unknowable universe was now preparing society for an unknowable crowd. The continuity is easy to miss, but it is essential. The medieval world did not suddenly change, it evolved its fears. Each strange sight, each whispered belief had built a foundation of attentiveness that now turned inward. And so, as night fell over growing towns and as lamps flickered along narrow streets, people carried with them the full weight of their past uncertainties. They were ready, though they did not know it, for a different kind of darkness, one that would no longer descend from above in the form of omens and signs, but rise from the ground itself, shaped by human presence and human intent. As cities grew louder, fear no longer came from the sky, but from the street.
Rome was not always marble and order. By day, it reflected power through stone and symmetry. But at night, the city softened and darkened, revealing a different rhythm. When the sun slipped behind rooftops and shadows stretched across narrow streets, Rome breathed differently. The grandeur faded into something more human, more fragile, and far less controlled. In these hours, the city belonged not to emperors or senators, but to ordinary people navigating a landscape shaped by proximity and tension. The streets were narrow, often winding without logic, pressed between tall buildings that trapped sound and shadow. Light came unevenly from oil lamps and open doorways, leaving long stretches in dim uncertainty. Moving through Rome at night required attention. One listened not only with the ears, but with the body, sensing shifts in atmosphere before they became visible. Taverns played a quiet but significant role in this nocturnal world. They were places of warmth, noise, and temporary belonging. Inside, voices overlapped, cups clinked, and laughter rose and fell in unpredictable waves. Taverns offered relief from cramped living spaces and long working days, but they also gathered emotions that had nowhere else to go. Frustration,
Pride, rivalry, and fear mingled freely, often without clear boundaries. When people stood close together for long enough, tension did not need an invitation. It emerged naturally, sparked by glances, words spoken too quickly, or misunderstandings amplified by drink. Violence in ancient Rome was rarely sudden in its origins. It grew quietly from accumulation. A crowded street where carts blocked passage, a tavern where tempers simmered, a neighborhood where alliances were remembered longer than laws. Groups formed not always with intention, but with familiarity. Men who worked the same trades, lived on the same blocks, or drank in the same places began to move together, first casually, then deliberately. These were not organized armies, but informal networks bound by presence and shared grievance. The city did not officially recognize them, but it felt their weight. In this environment, strength became a language. Not always physical force, but the visible readiness for it. To walk confidently, to stand one's ground, to be seen with others, these were signals as clear as any spoken threat. The crowdedness of Rome meant that personal space was scarce, and with that scarcity came friction. Every interaction carried potential. A bump in the street could be accidental or intentional. The difference mattered less than the response it provoked. Over time, people learned to interpret subtle cues, adjusting their paths, their pace, their gaze. Avoidance became a skill, as important as courage. This constant negotiation shaped daily life in ways rarely recorded in official histories. Rome's greatness is often told through monuments and conquests, but its stability depended equally on unspoken agreements forged at street level. People learned where to walk, when to speak, and how to read a crowd. Violence was not omnipresent, but its possibility was always nearby, like a shadow following movement. This presence changed behavior. Voices lowered more quickly. Gestures became measured. Silence sometimes felt safer than explanation. The Roman street at night was not lawless chaos. It was a space governed by informal rules, enforced not by courts, but by reputation and memory. Those who ignored these rules did not always face immediate consequences, but the city remembered. Names circulated quietly. Faces became associated with trouble or trust. In this way, the crowd itself became a regulating force, unpredictable yet attentive. What made this world unsettling was not constant danger, but uncertainty. One could pass through a street safely dozens of times, only to find it transformed by a single gathering or dispute. Familiar spaces shifted without warning. The line between safety and threat was thin and movable, shaped by who was present and how they felt. In such conditions, distance took on new meaning. Being far from home no longer meant only physical separation. It meant being removed from known signals and trusted patterns. As Rome grew denser and louder, people carried this awareness with them, learning that the greatest risks were no longer written in the stars, but woven into the movement of bodies and voices around them.
As night settled more fully over Rome, the city did not fall silent. It rearranged its sounds. The daytime clatter of trade faded, replaced by footsteps, murmurs, and the low hum of human presence lingering after work was done. People did not rush home all at once. Many remained outside, drawn by habit, necessity, or the simple desire to not be alone. In these hours, the streets became shared living spaces, places where personal boundaries dissolved into collective movement. This closeness shaped behavior in subtle but lasting ways. To exist safely within the crowd, one learned not only where to stand, but how to be seen. Visibility mattered. Being recognized, acknowledged, or associated with others could mean the difference between passing unnoticed and being challenged. In Rome's densely packed neighborhoods, isolation carried its own risks. A lone figure moved differently through the night than someone accompanied, even if the group was small and informal. Companionship functioned as a quiet protection, a signal to others that this person belonged somewhere, to someone. Over time, these patterns hardened into expectations. Certain groups became familiar sights, occupying the same corners, walking the same routes, returning to the same taverns night after night. Their presence stabilized space, but it also claimed it. A street did not need walls to feel controlled, it only needed repetition. When people knew who stood where, uncertainty narrowed and power settled into routine. This is how informal gangs emerged, not always through explicit intention, but through consistency. They were collections of people bound by shared territory and shared time. Their authority was not declared, it was assumed. Violence in this context was less an act of chaos than a tool of maintenance. It reminded others of boundaries without requiring constant use. The threat alone often sufficed. A raised voice, a step forward, a shift in posture communicated what words did not need to say. These gestures became part of the city's grammar, understood by those who lived within it. Importantly, this violence was rarely abstract, it was immediate, local, impersonal. Disputes were remembered, slights accumulated. Reputation mattered deeply because memory was long. In the absence of consistent enforcement, the past remained present, shaping reactions and expectations. People adjusted their lives around these dynamics. Shopkeepers closed earlier or later depending on who gathered nearby. Families timed errands to avoid certain hours. Routes were chosen not for efficiency, but for familiarity. Rome's streets thus became layered with meaning, each turn carrying associations built over time. The city was not dangerous everywhere, but it was unpredictable anywhere. This unpredictability shaped a specific kind of alertness, one that did not rely on fear alone, but on anticipation. People watched the crowd as one watches weather, sensing when conditions might change. A sudden increase in noise, a gathering that felt too dense, or the arrival of unfamiliar faces could shift the mood of an entire street. In such moments, movement slowed or redirected, not through panic, but through practiced caution. Children learned these patterns early, absorbing them through observation rather than instruction. They noticed where adults hesitated, where conversations ended abruptly, where laughter did not linger. These lessons embedded themselves quietly, forming an intuitive map of safe and unsafe spaces. In this way, Roman street life educated its inhabitants continuously, without formal structure. What made this system effective was not its fairness, but its clarity. Rules were unwritten, yet widely understood. Transgressions were not always punished immediately, but they were remembered. This memory reinforced behavior, encouraging conformity where possible and avoidance where not. Over time, violence receded into the background, not because it vanished, but because it became predictable. And predictability, even when harsh, can feel safer than chaos. This is how people lived with danger without being consumed by it. They adjusted, adapted, and internalized the rhythms of the street. Yet this adaptation came at a cost. As reliance on proximity and group presence increased, distance began to feel unsettling. To move far from familiar streets meant stepping outside known patterns of control. The further one traveled, the fewer signals remained to interpret intention or threat. In such a world, safety was no longer tied to location alone, but to recognition. Being known mattered more than being armed. And so, as Rome continued to grow louder and crowded, the sense of security narrowed inward, anchoring itself to specific streets, faces, and routines. Beyond those boundaries, uncertainty returned, carrying with it the same unease once inspired by strange skies and unseen forces, now reshaped into something closer, more human, and far harder to escape.
As Roman life adapted to the rhythms of crowded streets, a quiet transformation took place in how people understood safety. In earlier generations, danger had been associated with remoteness. Beyond the city walls lay uncertainty, the wilderness, the unknown. Distance meant exposure. But within Rome's growing neighborhoods, this logic slowly reversed. The closer people lived to one another, the more carefully they measured space. Safety no longer depended on isolation, but on familiarity. To be surrounded by known faces, known routines, and known responses felt stabilizing, even when those routines included tension or threat. Over time, people learned that what mattered most was not whether a place was peaceful, but whether it was predictable. The Roman street taught this lesson relentlessly. A familiar alley, even one known for occasional violence, could feel safer than an unfamiliar road that offered no cues at all. Predictability allowed preparation. One could anticipate who might be present, how they might behave, and what signals preceded escalation. Distance, by contrast, stripped away these references. To move beyond one's usual routes meant entering a space where intentions were harder to read and reputations did not travel with you. This made travel within the city itself an act of calculation. Romans did not fear movement outright, but they respected its risks. They planned journeys around time, company, and recognition. Going alone, especially at night, carried a different weight than moving with others. The presence of companions created a shared field of awareness, multiple sets of eyes attuned to the same environment. Even silence felt different when shared. In these moments, people were not simply walking, they were navigating layers of social meaning embedded in every street. This navigation relied heavily on memory. Past encounters lingered, shaping expectations long after events themselves had passed. A corner where voices once rose remained charged, even if nothing happened there again. A street that had witnessed confrontation carried an invisible residue, altering how people walked through it. These memories were collective, reinforced through conversation and observation. They form a kind of informal map, passed quietly from person to person, guiding movement without ever being written down. In this way, the city educated its inhabitants continuously, teaching them where familiarity ended and uncertainty began. Violence played a subtle but powerful role in reinforcing these boundaries. It did not need to be constant to be effective. Occasional displays were enough to anchor memory and shape behavior. When an incident occurred, it echoed far beyond its immediate participants. People spoke of it in fragments, careful not to dwell, but careful not to forget. These recollections sharpened awareness, reminding everyone that the street was a shared space, governed as much by reaction as by rule. Over time, this awareness altered the emotional geography of Rome. Certain areas became extensions of home, not because they were gentle, but because they were known. Others remained abstract, avoided unless necessary. Distance thus transformed from a physical measure into a psychological one. Being far from one's familiar streets meant being far from one's interpretive tools. Without those tools, every sound and movement demanded attention, increasing fatigue and tension.
This made long journeys within the city feel heavier than their length suggested. The further one traveled, the more effort it required to remain alert. In response, Romans narrowed their worlds. Daily life contracted around reliable circuits, loops of movement that minimized exposure to uncertainty. Markets, baths, taverns, and workplaces formed predictable constellations, each reinforcing the sense of belonging to a specific urban territory. This contraction did not signal withdrawal, but adaptation. It was a way of conserving energy in an environment that demanded constant vigilance. Yet this adaptation also reinforced divisions. As people became more rooted in their own areas, unfamiliar faces stood out more sharply. Outsiders were noticed immediately, not because they looked different, but because they moved differently. Their hesitation, their curiosity, or their lack of awareness marked them as unaligned with local rhythms. This visibility increased vulnerability, creating a feedback loop where distance bred risk and risk discouraged distance. Rome thus became a mosaic of micro-worlds, each governed by its own expectations and informal rules. The city's vastness was experienced not as a single entity, but as a series of overlapping neighborhoods, each with its own sense of order. In such a landscape, the concept of safety shifted inward. Protection came less from walls or laws and more from recognition and routine. Knowing where you belonged mattered more than knowing where you were. And so, as streets grew more dangerous in their unpredictability, distance itself began to feel unsafe, not because it led away from protection, but because it led away from understanding. This quiet inversion marked a turning point in urban life, preparing people to value connection over separation, familiarity over exploration, and speed over distance. Lessons that would shape how future societies confronted the risks of movement and the anxiety of the unknown.
By the height of Rome's urban life, the city had learned to carry its tensions quietly. What once erupted as visible confrontation increasingly dissolved into posture, timing, and unspoken understanding. People sensed when a street was changing before anything overt happened. A shift in noise, a tightening of movement, or a subtle reordering of bodies was often enough to signal that caution was required. This sensitivity did not come from fear alone, but from long familiarity with crowded living. Romans had grown accustomed to reading the city as a living system, responsive to pressure and capable of sudden change. In this environment, violence no longer needed to be frequent to be effective. Its memory did the work. The knowledge that force could appear shaped behavior more reliably than force itself. This created a paradoxical calm, a fragile equilibrium sustained by mutual awareness. People moved with intention, selecting routes and companions with care, not out of constant anxiety, but out of practiced wisdom. The night city rewarded those who paid attention. Those who ignored its signals rarely remained ignorant for long. Over time, this attentiveness reshaped social trust. Confidence was no longer rooted in authority or law, but in recognition. Being known, even imperfectly, mattered more than being powerful. Names carried weight. Faces accumulated meaning. A familiar presence could diffuse tension simply by being seen. Conversely, anonymity became liability. To be unknown in the wrong place at the wrong time invited scrutiny, not always hostile, but always alert. This dynamic altered how people understood distance. Physical separation from familiar streets was no longer neutral, it was destabilizing. Each step away from known territory reduced the number of cues available to interpret intent. Without those cues, the mind worked harder, scanning for meaning where none was obvious. Fatigue followed. What had once been a short walk could feel like a journey, not because of length, but because of sustained vigilance. As a result, Romans increasingly valued connection over separation. They sought to shorten not only physical routes, but the time spent in uncertainty. They traveled with purpose, minimized unnecessary movement, and favored paths that offered continuity of recognition. The city's vastness, impressive by day, contracted by night into series of intimate zones, each with its own rhythm and expectations. These zones were not formally marked, yet everyone seemed to know where one ended and another began. Crossing between them required adjustment, a recalibration of posture and pace. This constant recalibration shaped the Roman experience of urban life, embedding a subtle tension into everyday movement. Yet it also revealed a deeper human pattern. When environments grow dense and unpredictable, people do not retreat into isolation, they build networks. Even informal, fragile connections provide orientation. In Rome, these networks took the form of shared streets, familiar faces, and repeated encounters. They did not eliminate violence, but they made it legible. Legibility, in turn, allowed endurance. People could live alongside danger without being overwhelmed because they understood its contours. This understanding, however, came with limits. Beyond the reach of recognition lay spaces where the city's informal grammar no longer applied. Here, the usual signals failed, and the sense of control weakened. These spaces were not necessarily more violent, but they felt more threatening because they resisted interpretation. In them, distance itself became a source of unease. To be far from known patterns was to be far from the tools needed to navigate risk. This inversion of safety marked a turning point. Earlier societies had feared the unknown because it lay beyond the community. In Rome, the unknown emerged within the community, hiding in unfamiliar movement rather than distant wilderness. The response to this shift was not withdrawal, but acceleration. People sought ways to reduce the time spent between points of recognition, to bridge gaps quickly and efficiently. The desire to move faster, to connect distant places more reliably, began as a response to urban unease. It was born not of ambition, but of exhaustion. Constant vigilance demanded relief. Shortening uncertainty promised rest. And so, quietly, beneath the noise of streets and the memory of violence, a new value took shape. Speed became safety, connection became comfort. Distance, once a measure of freedom, transformed into a source of anxiety. When streets became dangerous, distance itself began to feel unsafe. And in this realization lay the seed of a different solution, one that would not rely on controlling crowds, but on crossing space more quickly, carrying certainty across vast stretches of land.
There was a time when silence between two cities could last weeks, sometimes longer. Not the gentle silence of night, but a heavy, unanswered quiet that stretched across plains, mountains, and rivers. In the mid-19th century, distance was not simply measured in miles, but in uncertainty. When a letter was sent, it disappeared into the landscape, carried away by dust, weather, and chance. Until it arrived, nothing was known. No confirmation, no reassurance,
only waiting. For people living on the American frontier, this waiting shaped daily life. News did not arrive as a steady flow. It came in bursts, separated by long stretches of not knowing. A family might send word east and then live for weeks with unanswered questions. Was the message received? Was it delayed? Was it lost entirely? Silence left space for imagination, and imagination often drifted toward worry. This emotional weight gave distance its power. It was not the land itself that troubled people, but the absence of connection across it. In this context, the Pony Express emerged not as a heroic adventure, but as a response to unease. It was an attempt to shorten the space between moments of knowing, to make the unknown more manageable. Riders did not set out to conquer distance, they moved through it, steadily and repeatedly, creating a rhythm where there had been only pause. The system itself was simple in design, yet profound in effect. Messages traveled in stages, passed hand to hand, horse to horse, each segment reducing the burden of waiting just a little. For those sending letters, this did not eliminate uncertainty, but it softened it. The promise that information was moving, even slowly, offered comfort. It transformed silence from a void into an interval. Life on the frontier was already shaped by slowness. Days followed the land and the weather rather than the clock. The arrival of news punctuated this rhythm, marking time in emotional terms. A letter could bring relief, worry, or change, but above all, it brought clarity. Even bad news was often easier to carry than none at all. Knowing allowed people to adjust, to plan, or simply to rest their minds. The Pony Express did not accelerate life itself, it accelerated awareness. It reduced the length of uncertainty, and in doing so, reduced anxiety. Riders were rarely seen by those who benefited most from their work. They passed quickly, often at the edges of settlements, visible only for moments. Their presence was brief, but its implications lingered. The knowledge that someone was crossing vast distances with information created a sense of continuity across space. The frontier no longer felt completely isolated. It was still distant, still demanding, but less silent. This change was subtle, yet significant. Communities began to orient themselves around anticipated arrivals. Time was measured not only by seasons, but by expectations. When news was due, people listened differently, watched the horizon with quiet focus. The waiting itself became structured. Silence was no longer endless, it had a possible end. In this way, the Pony Express altered the emotional landscape more than the physical one. It did not erase hardship or danger, but it reframed them. Distance remained, but it became traversable in the imagination. The knowledge that information could cross mountains and deserts gave people a sense of belonging to a wider world, even when their daily lives remained local and slow. This sense of connection did not rely on speed alone. It relied on consistency. The repeated movement of messages, predictable in its unpredictability, created trust. People learned to expect news, not immediately, but eventually. This expectation mattered. It allowed patience to become a practice rather than a burden. Waiting, once passive, became active. It was filled with anticipation rather than dread. And so, in a quiet way, the Pony Express responded to a deeply human need. It addressed the anxiety created when distance interrupts understanding. It offered not instant answers, but reassurance that answers were possible. In an age before constant updates, this reassurance was enough. It did not overwhelm the senses or demand attention. It simply reduced the weight of silence. As messages began to move more reliably, people adjusted their inner rhythms. They slept with fewer unanswered questions pressing on their thoughts. They trusted that in time, what they needed to know would arrive. This trust marked the beginning of a new relationship with distance, one where space no longer implied abandonment, but delay. And delay, unlike silence, could be endured.
Waiting in the age of the Pony Express was not empty time. It was a state of mind that shaped the hours between waking and sleep. On the frontier, people learned to live inside uncertainty, not because they wished to, but because there was no alternative. Each day carried the same quiet question beneath its routines. Has anything changed elsewhere? Has news begun its long journey across the land? These questions were rarely spoken aloud, yet they lingered in the background of every task. Work continued because it had to, but attention drifted easily toward the horizon. The act of waiting softened the edges of daily life, slowing gestures and stretching moments. People listened more closely, not only for approaching riders, but for any sign that the silence might soon be broken. The arrival of mail was not dramatic. There were no announcements or ceremonies. Often it was noticed only when someone paused mid-motion, sensing that something was different. A figure appeared in the distance, small and indistinct at first, moving with purpose but without spectacle. The knowledge that a message existed somewhere along the route created anticipation long before the message itself arrived. This anticipation filled the waiting with meaning. It transformed uncertainty into expectation. Even when news was delayed, the possibility of its arrival structured thought. People planned conversations they might have, decisions they might make, reactions they might need to prepare. The mind rehearsed futures quietly, using imagined information to ease the discomfort of not knowing. This process was deeply human. It allowed individuals to feel engaged with distant events without being overwhelmed by them. When a letter finally arrived, it did not erase the weeks of waiting, it absorbed them. The words on the page carried not only information, but the weight of time itself. Reading became a slow, deliberate act. People often reread the same lines, not because they did not understand them, but because they wanted to linger in certainty. Knowing, even briefly, felt grounding. It anchored the mind, giving shape to emotions that had been diffuse. Relief, worry, or grief settled more gently when they had a name. This is why the Pony Express mattered even though it existed for such a short time. It did not revolutionize communication by modern standards. It did not make information instant. What it changed was the emotional texture of distance. It replaced the endless silence of waiting with a structured delay. People knew that news was moving, that someone else was carrying it forward step by step. This knowledge reduced the feeling of abandonment that distance often created. Silence became less personal. It was no longer interpreted as neglect or loss, but as part of a process unfolding elsewhere. Night, in particular, took on a different quality. Sleep came more easily when uncertainty felt temporary rather than absolute. People lay down knowing that, somewhere in the dark, movement continued. Horses ran, hands exchanged letters, and routes were followed with steady repetition. This unseen activity created a sense of continuity that extended beyond individual lives. The frontier felt connected, not tightly, but enough. The waiting did not disappear, but it softened. It became rhythmic rather than oppressive. Days passed with the understanding that information would eventually arrive, even if it carried difficult truths. This expectation reshaped patience. Instead of resisting the slow pace of life, people adapted to it, aligning their thoughts with longer timelines. They learned to hold uncertainty without letting it dominate. The Pony Express, in this sense, functioned less as a delivery system and more as an emotional framework. It taught people how to live with delay. This lesson was subtle and easily overlooked, yet it resonated deeply. Even after the service ended, the idea it represented endured.
The belief that distance could be crossed reliably changed how people imagined their place in the world. They no longer felt entirely cut off, even when they were physically far apart. This shift did not eliminate longing or fear, but it placed them within a broader context. Waiting became something shared rather than solitary. Others were waiting too, listening for the same quiet signals, trusting the same unseen paths. In this shared experience, the frontier gained a sense of collective time, a slow pulse connecting distant lives. And within that pulse, people found rest, not because answers were immediate, but because they were possible. The space between question and response no longer felt infinite. It felt traversable. And that difference, though gentle, was profound.
As the Pony Express became part of frontier life, its most powerful influence was not speed, but regularity. The riders themselves remained mostly invisible, fleeting figures passing through dust and shadow, yet the idea of their movement settled deeply into the minds of those who waited. What mattered was not who carried the message, but that the message moved at all. Over time, trust shifted away from individuals and toward the system itself. People stopped imagining the rider's face and began imagining the route. They thought in terms of stages, distances, and intervals. This abstraction reduced anxiety. When responsibility was distributed across many hands, no single delay felt catastrophic. A late arrival no longer meant failure, it meant that the process was still unfolding. This change altered how people related to uncertainty. Instead of fearing interruption, they began to expect continuity. Even when the outcome was unknown, the motion toward it felt reliable. This reliability allowed the mind to relax into waiting. Frontier communities slowly learned to synchronize their expectations with the rhythm of delivery. They understood that news would not arrive when summoned, but when its time came. This understanding softened impatience. It encouraged a longer view of events, one that stretched beyond immediate reaction. Decisions were made with an awareness of delay, and emotions were held gently rather than urgently. The Pony Express thus taught a form of emotional pacing. It aligned inner time with outer distance. In doing so, it reduced the strain caused by constant vigilance. People no longer scanned the horizon continuously. They learned when to look and when to rest. This division between attention and release created space for calm. Even uncertainty became manageable when it followed a pattern. Patterns give shape to experience, and shape offers comfort. The repetition of routes, schedules, and expectations transformed the vast frontier into a network of anticipated moments. Each station marked not only a physical stop, but a psychological one. It reassured those waiting that progress was occurring, even if they could not see it. This reassurance did not depend on speed alone. It depended on trust built through repetition. Each successful delivery reinforced the belief that distance could be crossed again. Over time, this belief became habitual. People no longer questioned whether messages would arrive, only when. This subtle shift reduced mental burden. It freed attention for daily life, allowing people to invest more fully in their immediate surroundings. They could work, rest, and sleep with less distraction. The silence between messages no longer felt empty, it felt purposeful. It was filled with the knowledge that something was underway. This sense of ongoing movement extended beyond communication. It influenced how people imagined progress itself. The frontier, once defined by separation, began to feel linked by invisible threads. These threads did not eliminate hardship, but they framed it within a broader story of connection.
Even solitude felt different when it was temporary rather than absolute. The Pony Express embodied this idea quietly. It did not announce transformation, it enacted it through consistency. By doing so, it changed how people measured distance emotionally. Miles mattered less than intervals. Space mattered less than sequence. The waiting mind found comfort in order. This comfort was not excitement, it was steadiness. It was the relief that comes from knowing that processes exist beyond one's control, yet work in one's favor. Such relief is deeply conducive to rest. It allows the body to release tension, trusting that concerns will be addressed in time. As nights passed on the frontier, people slept with the understanding that motion continued elsewhere. Their own stillness was mirrored by movement beyond their sight. This balance between rest and progress eased the strain of isolation. It suggested that being still did not mean being forgotten. The system carried forward even when individuals paused. This realization marked a turning point in how people related to distance. Instead of experiencing it as an absence, they experienced it as a pathway. And pathways invite patience rather than fear. In this way, the Pony Express prepared people for a new relationship with space and time, one that valued continuity over immediacy. It laid the emotional groundwork for later innovations, not by accelerating life, but by making waiting sustainable. And sustainability, more than speed, is what allows calm to endure.
As the Pony Express settled into memory, its quiet lesson remained. Speed had shortened the gap between question and answer, yet it had not replaced the need for steadiness. Even when messages moved faster, life itself continued at a human pace. People still woke with the sun, worked with the land, and rested when darkness returned. Information arrived sooner than before, but it did not arrive continuously. Between messages, the old spaces of waiting still existed. What changed was how those spaces were experienced. They were no longer hollow, they were filled with trust. This trust did not depend on constant updates or visible proof. It depended on the belief that systems would hold, that routes would be followed, and that continuity would persist even when unseen. Such belief created a subtle calm. It allowed people to accept delay without anxiety, knowing that movement was occurring elsewhere. In this way, speed became supportive rather than disruptive. It reduced the sharpness of uncertainty without overwhelming the senses. The Pony Express thus revealed a deeper truth about human comfort. Acceleration alone does not soothe the mind. What soothes is reliability. What brings rest is not the elimination of waiting, but the assurance that waiting has meaning. This realization echoed beyond communication. As societies grew more connected, they discovered that faster links did not erase the need for rituals, routines, and shared anchors. Even as distance shrank, people sought constancy in daily habits. Meals were eaten at familiar times, streets were walked in familiar ways. Small, repeated actions grounded the mind amid broader change. The frontier, once defined by vast separation, began to feel more navigable, yet its inhabitants still turned to ordinary comforts to steady themselves. Letters connected faraway places, but touch, taste, and routine connected people to the present moment. This balance between reach and grounding shaped a more sustainable rhythm of life. The lesson was gentle but enduring. Humans thrive not on speed alone, but on patterns that can be trusted. When information flows too quickly, it can fragment attention. When it flows with consistency, it supports calm. The Pony Express leaned toward the latter. It offered progress without pressure. It made distance manageable without demanding constant vigilance. In doing so, it prepared people for a future where connection would only increase. Yet it also hinted at a limit. No matter how efficiently messages traveled, they could not replace the stabilizing presence of shared spaces and shared experiences. The mind, even when reassured by news, still sought something tangible and familiar. This need drew people back to places where life unfolded slowly and predictably. Taverns, kitchens, markets, and streets provided this grounding. They offered sensory continuity in a world of expanding reach. Here, the body could rest while the world moved on. And so, as communication sped up, attention turned inward toward the rhythms of everyday life. The Pony Express closed one chapter of distance, but it opened another chapter of balance. It showed that reducing uncertainty was only part of the equation. The other part was maintaining a sense of stability amid change. This stability came from repetition, from shared practices that did not need to travel far to be meaningful. In time, societies learned to pair faster connections with slower rituals. They moved information swiftly while preserving spaces of calm. This pairing allowed people to remain present even as horizons expanded. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into history, their echo lingered in how people understood comfort. They learned that reassurance could arrive not only through letters, but through the constancy of daily life. Even with messages moving faster, people still needed something constant, something that could be relied upon night after night, something that asked little and offered warmth in return. This realization guided attention toward the ordinary scenes that held communities together. In places where empires rose and fell, it was often the simple acts of eating, gathering, and sharing that endured. These acts did not conquer distance, but they softened it. They reminded people that regardless of how far news traveled, life was lived locally. And it was within these local moments that the mind found rest. With this understanding, the story turns gently away from speed and toward sustenance, away from roots and toward tables. It moves from the anxiety of distance to the comfort of presence, from the promise of connection to the pleasure of constancy. No matter the empire, hunger always arrived quietly. In Constantinople, it did not announce itself with urgency or drama. It moved gently through the city, slipping between stone walls and narrow streets, settling into the spaces between work and rest. As daylight softened and shadows lengthened, the city began to breathe differently. Markets closed their larger stalls, but smaller presences remained. The scent of warm bread drifted outward, not demanding attention, only offering itself to those who passed by. This was not food meant to impress. It was food meant to be recognized. In a city shaped by power, faith, and constant motion, these ordinary offerings created a pause. People did not stop because they were hungry alone. They stopped because the moment felt familiar. The sound of oil touching a pan, the quiet exchange between seller and buyer, the simple act of waiting one's turn, all contributed to a sense of continuity. These scenes repeated night after night, regardless of who ruled or what banners flew above the walls. Street food in Constantinople was less about nourishment in the physical sense and more about reassurance. It reminded people that some rhythms endured. The city was vast and complex, a meeting place of worlds, yet these small interactions grounded it. Vendors were not anonymous figures. They were known by sight, sometimes by name, sometimes simply by presence. Their routines offered stability. Even newcomers quickly learned where certain smells came from, where certain sounds lingered. This familiarity reduced the city's scale, making it feel navigable and kind. The food itself carried memory. A piece of bread tasted much like it had the night before, and the night before that. Consistency mattered. In times of uncertainty, predictable sensations calmed the mind. The warmth of a simple meal, held briefly in the hands, anchored people in the present. It asked nothing of them except attention. There was no need to hurry. Eating on the street allowed time to stretch. People lingered, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because the moment invited them to stay. Conversations softened, movements slowed. Even the city's noise seemed to adjust, lowering itself to accommodate this shared pause. Hunger, once satisfied, left behind something gentler than fullness. It left behind ease. This ease was precious in a city that knew upheaval. Constantinople had witnessed sieges, celebrations, and endless transitions. Yet through it all, these small rituals persisted. They did not resist change directly, they absorbed it. When uncertainty pressed in, people turned toward what they could trust. Street food offered that trust quietly. It required no explanation and no allegiance. Anyone could approach. Anyone could participate. This openness reinforced a sense of belonging that transcended divisions. The act of eating together, even without conversation, created connection. Strangers stood side by side, sharing space and time. Differences dissolved briefly in the shared focus on something warm and familiar. This was the city at its most human, not in its grand ceremonies or imposing structures, but in these fleeting gatherings around food. The simplicity of the experience allowed the mind to rest. It reminded people that life continued in manageable pieces, one bite, one moment, one evening at a time. In this way, street food functioned as a kind of quiet anchor. It held the city steady as everything else shifted. For those listening now, this scene offers an invitation. Imagine the gentle glow of lanterns, the soft murmur of voices, the comforting predictability of a meal prepared as it has always been. Let the details blur slightly, leaving only sensation, the warmth, the scent, the unspoken understanding that this moment is enough. History here does not demand attention. It simply unfolds, offering rest rather than instruction. And as the night deepens, these ordinary comforts guide the mind towards stillness, reminding us that even in the heart of an empire, peace often arrived in the simplest ways.
As night settled more fully over Constantinople, the streets did not empty, they softened. The urgency of daytime commerce faded, replaced by a slower, more deliberate rhythm. Footsteps became measured rather than rushed, voices lowered, blending into a gentle murmur that seemed to hover rather than travel. In this quieter hour, street food took on a different role. It was no longer simply a response to hunger at the end of a working day. It became part of the city's transition into rest. Vendors remained at their familiar spots, their presence steady and unchanging, offering a sense of continuity that guided people through the evening. The repetition of these scenes mattered. Night after night, the same smells rose into the air, the same sounds marked the passage of time. This predictability transformed the streets into something close to ritual space. People did not need to decide where to go. Their bodies remembered. They followed paths worn smooth by habit, drawn by familiarity rather than novelty. In a city where politics, faith, and fortune could shift without warning, these small certainties provided balance. The act of stopping for food slowed the body and focused the senses.
Hands warmed around simple portions, breathing eased, attention narrowed to the immediate moment. This narrowing was restful. It reduced the mental noise carried from the day, allowing thoughts to loosen and drift. Street food did not demand reflection or judgment. It required only presence. Eating in this way connected individuals to a shared rhythm larger than themselves. Others stood nearby, engaged in the same quiet pause. No coordination was required. The alignment emerged naturally through repetition. This shared stillness did not erase difference, but it softened it. For a brief time, people were united by the same small need and the same simple response. The city, vast and layered, felt momentarily intimate. The sounds of cooking blended with the night air, creating a gentle backdrop against which the mind could rest. Even those who did not stop to eat were influenced by the atmosphere. Passing through these spaces, they absorbed the calm, carrying it forward into the darker streets beyond. In this way, the ritual extended outward, shaping the tone of the evening. Constantinople's nights were not defined solely by silence or danger. They were defined by continuity. Food anchored the hours, marking a gentle descent from activity into rest. The body recognized this signal instinctively. After nourishment came stillness. After stillness, sleep felt nearer. These patterns repeated across generations, embedding themselves into the city's collective memory. Empires changed, walls were repaired, rulers came and went, but the rhythm of night eating endured. It was transmitted not through instruction, but through observation. Children learned by watching where adults paused, how long they lingered, and how the city quieted around them. This learning was subtle and effective. It shaped expectations about how nights should feel. Even during times of uncertainty, these expectations provided comfort. The familiar sequence of evening sounds and scents reassured the mind that life remained intact. In this sense, street food was not peripheral to urban life, it was central to emotional regulation. It offered a reliable marker in time, a moment that could be anticipated and trusted. Anticipation itself became soothing. Knowing that the evening pause would come allowed people to endure the demands of the day with greater ease. This relationship between routine and resilience was not unique to Constantinople, but it found a particularly rich expression there. The city's position as a crossroads amplified the need for shared anchors. People from different backgrounds and beliefs encountered one another daily. Food provided common ground. It required no translation. Its meaning was immediate. Through these nightly rituals, Constantinople demonstrated how ordinary practices sustain communities. They create continuity without requiring uniformity. They allow difference to coexist within a shared rhythm. For those listening now, this scene invites a similar slowing. Imagine standing quietly at the edge of a softly lit street, the sounds of cooking nearby, the knowledge that nothing urgent is required of you. Let the repetition of small actions signal that the day is complete. Allow the body to follow this ancient pattern, releasing effort and welcoming rest. History in this moment does not rush forward, it circles gently, offering the same comfort it has offered for centuries. And within that circle, the mind finds permission to grow still. Over time, the streets of Constantinople were shaped not only by stone and passage, but by people who returned night after night. Among them, the food sellers became quiet landmarks. They were not marked on maps, yet they oriented lives. A familiar face behind a small stall could signal that the evening had begun as expected. This recognition carried comfort. It told passers-by that the day was unfolding within known boundaries. The sellers themselves rarely spoke much. Their presence did the speaking. Hands moved with practiced ease, repeating motions refined through countless evenings. These gestures carried memory. They reminded people that yesterday had passed safely and that tonight would likely do the same. In a city that often changed above eye level, these ground-level constancies mattered. People came to associate certain moments with certain places. A corner smelled like warm bread at dusk. Another echoed softly with the sound of cooking oil settling. These associations accumulated quietly, becoming personal markers of time. They did not require attention to function. They simply existed, ready to be felt when needed. For many, these nightly encounters became woven into memory. Years later, what lingered was not the exact taste or price, but the feeling of being there, held briefly by routine. Memory works this way. It preserves sensation more readily than detail. The mind recalls warmth, light, and the ease of familiarity long after specifics fade. Street food provided these sensations generously. It asked nothing in return. In moments of fatigue or uncertainty, people returned to these small anchors. They stood where they had stood before, letting the repetition steady them. This steadiness was subtle but powerful. It reminded them that life continued in recognizable patterns even when larger narratives shifted. Empires rose and fell, but the rhythm of evening nourishment endured. The sellers aged, were replaced, or moved on, yet the role remained. Someone always stood there, offering something warm at the end of the day. This continuity created a sense of inheritance, a feeling that one was participating in a long chain of ordinary nights. Such participation grounded identity. People felt less alone, knowing that others had stood in the same place, felt the same quiet hunger, and found the same modest relief. These shared experiences did not require words. They were communicated through presence. The city itself seemed to remember. Streets carried the weight of countless pauses, countless brief rests taken by those who passed through. This accumulation of stillness softened the urban environment. It made the city more forgiving. Even during times of tension, these familiar points offered refuge. They did not promise escape, but they provided respite, a moment to breathe, to feel grounded, to re-enter the night with a calmer mind. For those listening now, this image invites reflection. Consider how small, repeated comforts shape your own sense of safety. The places you return to without thinking, the routines that steady you at the end of the day. These are not trivial. They are the quiet architecture of rest. Constantinople understood this instinctively. Its street food culture was not an accessory to daily life, it was an essential support. It held the city together at its most human scale. By focusing attention on the present moment, it reduced the weight of past and future. People ate, stood, and waited, allowing time to pass gently around them. This gentleness made room for sleep. As the evening deepened, the familiar faces remained until they did not. One by one, stalls closed. The city dimmed. What remained was the aftertaste of routine, lingering in memory. This aftertaste was enough. It carried people home, easing the transition from movement to stillness. And in that stillness, the mind found rest, supported by the knowledge that tomorrow would bring the same small comforts once again.
As the night in Constantinople moved toward its quietest hours, the streets gradually released their remaining energy. The last vendors packed away their tools with unhurried motions, as if extending the evening for just a little longer.
The sounds that once guided people through the city softened into memory. What remained was not emptiness, but a gentle afterglow, the sense that something steady had just taken place. This was how nights often ended here, not with a clear boundary, but with a slow easing. Street food did not simply disappear, it settled into the background of the mind, lingering as reassurance. For centuries, people had relied on these small constants to mark the end of the day. When the unfamiliar pressed in, when uncertainty filled the air, they returned to what they knew. This pattern repeated itself across time, linking generations who never met but shared the same quiet needs. The empire around them changed shape again and again. Borders shifted, power moved, yet the human requirement for comfort remained unchanged. Food, warmth, and routine provided that comfort without asking questions. They did not promise meaning or answers, they offered presence. In this way, the street food of Constantinople reflected the deeper truth running through all the stories you have heard tonight. Medieval people gazed at strange skies and accepted mystery as part of life. Romans navigated crowded streets where strength decided safety. Riders crossed vast distances to shorten silence and ease anxiety. And here, in the final chapter, we see where all those threads quietly meet. After fear, after noise, after distance, people sought something familiar, something repeatable, something that did not change with the world. A simple meal at the end of the day fulfilled that role. It grounded the body and calmed the mind. It reminded people that they were still part of a living rhythm, even when history felt overwhelming. This is why such ordinary moments endure in memory, not because they were dramatic, but because they were reliable. They created a sense of continuity that allowed individuals to rest. As the city slept, these routines continued invisibly, carried forward by expectation. Tomorrow evening, the same places would fill again, the same gestures would be repeated, the same calm would return. Knowing this allowed people to surrender the night. They did not need to stay alert. They did not need to watch the streets or read the sky. For a few hours, the world could be trusted to hold itself together. This trust is the quiet gift of routine. It allows the mind to release its vigilance. Listening now, you are invited into that same release. Let the stories of empires and centuries drift into the distance. Focus instead on the feeling left behind, the warmth of familiarity, the softness of repetition, the reassurance that not everything must be understood or controlled. History, when viewed this way, becomes less about events and more about continuity. It shows us how people endured not through constant strength, but through small, dependable comforts. As your breathing slows, imagine the streets of Constantinople at rest. Lanterns dimmed, voices faded, the knowledge that tomorrow will arrive in its own time. Allow this understanding to settle. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to anticipate. The night is complete, and like countless others before you, you can rest within it.